Alright guys, so section C then, of March to September. How did it go so wrong for Kerensky and the provisional government? Um, yeah, a good question. Well, I mean, the first thing that happens, and very, very soon after, well, less than a month after Kerensky's been made the Minister for War, decides, almost to prove to the Allies, I believe, to go on the offensive. Claims that it's done for the defence of the revolution. Goes to the front, as I've said, in his very theatrical political style, tries to rouse up these troops, believes that he is extremely well received because he has lots of whooping and hollering, as you can see here, this image of him at the front, such as soldiers removing their hats, etc. And kind of obviously reads it completely wrong. Even before this offensive begins, there are massive demonstrations in Petrograd, 400,000 soldiers, workers and citizens, and you know, it turns out that most of these slogans that people can see are Bolshevik ones. So as we can see here, this reads, "Peace to the whole world, all power to the people, all land to the people." And this says, "Down with the minister capitalists." So these are Bolshevik slogans, which we can you can see. And this is really where the Bolsheviks push on. Interestingly, again, further proof of power being with the Soviet and not with the Duma element of the provisional government. The 1st Machine Gun Regiment in Petrograd refuses to be sent to the front. It claims it breaks Order Number 1, which said that they need to keep their counter-revolutionary forces in Petrograd. And yeah, initially the attack goes well. Interestingly, there's a women's death battalion created, as 2 of them can be seen here. These women are brought in to try to revitalise the army, also seen as a way to try and, again, not the greatest thing, but to try to shame male soldiers to fight, because if the women can do it, why can't you? It proves not to be a success. Very quickly, after some initial early gains against Austria, there's mass desertions. So over 170,000 soldiers desert. That's just the official numbers. Mieville has it at even more than this. One stadium outside of Petrograd becomes its own kind of republic, full of just weary soldiers that are all, making their own almost little village around this stadium. And then, 50,000 reach Petrograd, and we start to now have, soldiers that have been to the front. They've just got no morale left. They don't know what they're fighting for. And this next coalition, this next government collapses very quickly. And in this collapse, in which the cadets and so the Duma and the Soviet are attempting to reach an agreement, we've got a 3-week power vacuum. So 3 weeks where nobody's ruling. Just so we can really get this clear in our heads as well. So this is General Brusilov, the commander-in-chief of the army at the time, and he said, this just goes to show how the Bolsheviks' messages started to take hold. He said, "The position of the Bolsheviks I understood because they preached down with the war and immediate peace at any price. But I couldn't understand at all the tactics of the SRs and the Mensheviks, who first broke up the army as if to avoid counter-revolution, and at the same time desired for the continuation of the war to its victorious end." So we can see here again the clarity of the message of the Bolsheviks really starting to sort of break through now, as all of these pressures start to build. And just so we can see as well, this is the Putilov factory. I like this image. I think it really helps us to sort of see, the crowds, the gathering of people, the gathering of workers, the shouting, the hollering, the demands being made, and the general atmosphere of Petrograd at this time. So, what happens then? So, in this 3-week period, I say the Bolsheviks. It's actually, we've got to be careful here. When we say Bolsheviks, obviously we mean those in the Bolshevik Party, but just like in any party, there's different groups, there's different factions, there are different opinions on how it and what should be done. And those in the Bolshevik military organisation, which was tellingly created back in early March, so the idea that a party should have its own military representatives, or those to defend it, many of which are in this first machine gun garrison regiment. Sorry, they want an uprising, and the Bolshevik Central Committee, so Lenin, Kamenev, Stalin, Sverdlov, they have no say in this. It's an element of the Bolshevik Party that takes it upon themselves to do this, and we kind of know this because Lenin had gone to Finland in order to kind of get his health back, because he was, I think, a bit weary from the strains of being back. I mean, just so we keep it in context, Lenin had written, I think, 48 articles in Pravda just in May alone, and he gave 21 speeches. So Lenin was tired, so he wasn't there. He was in Finland. What happened then? So, whipped up by the Bolshevik military organisation, on the 3rd of July, 500,000 people participated in armed demonstrations, so mainly workers and soldiers, against the provisional government. Kronstadt sailors, they sail in from Kronstadt, and the Bolshevik Central Committee essentially agrees to piggyback this, because they realise, well, we may as well sanction it, because otherwise we've got to try and put it down, and it seems very difficult to do so. So Lenin has to return, prove that it wasn't the committee that pushed it, but it was the military organisation of the party. In the mansion, can't remember how you pronounce it, but the Bolshevik headquarters, he shouts at them. Oh, here, Sekhinskaya mansion. He shouts at them to say, you should be given a hiding for this. You're the ones that made this happen, not me, not us. And he goes outside, and as we know, he's got the opportunity to sort of direct the energy of this revolutionary crowd that all know that that he wants the provisional government to fall. But again, he knows that now's not the right time, and so different theories about why. But he tells the crowd to calm down, that it should be a peaceful demonstration. Theories about why he does this, or that he doesn't judge it's the right time for the Bolsheviks to strike, doesn't think they've got enough support, or as Feiges thinks, he actually wasn't a very, very strong public speaker, and he actually was just nervous. Either way, as we know, what happens is instead they leave the headquarters. I think I put a map up here. They leave the headquarters here, and they make their way over the Neva to the Tauride Palace, or Taurida Palace, sorry, where the negotiations are happening between the Duma and the Soviet. So everyone's chanting all power to the Soviets. It's getting out of control. There's looting of shops. There's attacks on passers-by. A sort of mob mentality developing, and the Kronstadters have merged with the Putilov workers here, as we can see. Not just those, but I guess more. This is extremely famous image. This is when the Cossacks opened fire upon that crowd. I mean, what an image! This sense of urgency, chaos, possibility, fear, kind of panic. But as we so often see in this year, things kind of falling apart at the seams. And this is when we get one of these moments where, as Feige says, incredibly rare moments where the hidden relations of power, as he says, are illuminated on the surface of events, and we actually get to kind of see into the future from this point. And what does he mean by that? Well, even after the rain has come, as we know, and it's kind of dampened this energy, some of the Putilov workers, again, believing that they're speaking for themselves now, and feeling like the Soviets are the ones that have got the wind in their sails, break into the Taurida Palace where these negotiations are happening, and they walk into the room and they demand all power is given to the Soviets. And Shkedze, the man who had greeted Lenin, as you may have remembered from before, when he came back, and also called Lenin, a lunatic, and that he was a spent force or whatever, hands the new manifesto of the Soviet to these workers and says, this is what you should do. Don't tell us all power to the Soviets. Go home. Don't interrupt our business. I think Feige says this because what he's when he mentions here about the hidden relations of power is that, as he says, these men feel like they've got history on their side, then they walk in and they are made to feel like peons again. They're made to feel like the small person, and that they've had this mentality that even when they're trying to push out of it, that they're still, once they're put back in their place, they accept it. And this is what proves to be the case. And the July days, as it were, dampen down and dissipate. So what's the response to the July days then? Well, of course, because the Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik Central Committee had gotten behind it, and obviously it wasn't known at the time that they didn't push for it, but they were accused of working for the Germans because of Lenin's SEAL train, and they were suspected of being funded by the Germans, which is some historians do believe is true. Increases in their newspaper circulations, or they couldn't have afforded it otherwise. Because of the Bolsheviks being seen as the ones behind it, their mansion is raided, or their headquarters are raided by the provisional government. Kamenev and Trotsky are imprisoned, and Black Hundred, so the nationalist monarchists, they attack Bolsheviks in the streets, and Lenin is forced to flee to Finland with Zinoviev. At which point he claims that the state's now in the hands of a military dictatorship, and Feige thinks this is the point where Lenin realizes that there is no other way but an armed uprising. And as we can see here, this is the image of him in disguise to get out to Finland. So what happens after the July days then? Well, Kerensky becomes Prime Minister once this new coalition is formed. He becomes Prime Minister, and then later there is an agreement between it's actually no longer between the Soviet and the Duma committee as before. It's a kind of new form of government, as we can see here. It's no longer based on these democratic principles agreed with the Soviet as the basis for dual power. That's quite important, because we start to see a rolling back now of some of the freedoms that had been gained that made Russia the freest nation on the globe. The cadets have insisted, because of how fractious and difficult it's getting in the or fearful they are of unrest, as they've just seen with the July days. There's martial law has been introduced in an attempt to control the unrest. So it's essentially, the military can do whatever they want at any point to quell and put out problems. There's new restrictions on public gatherings, so the potential for strikes is lessening. Death penalties restored at the front, so that's obviously overriding order number one. And they've agreed to roll back the influence of soldiers' committees. So, essentially being able to say, taking power away from Soviet soldiers' committees. They've turned to the right, but again, it's actually more of a socialist government than it's ever been. So this strange balance. Problems for the provisional government at this point. By the end of August, almost at the end of this section, army is now completely disintegrating. Whole regiments deserting after the June offensive. The economic situation is getting worse. The peasants are still withholding grain. Manors are now being taken in the countryside. Lawlessness in the cities. We've got to keep this in mind, this backdrop, the whole time. So, what is the final nail in the coffin, somebody, for the provisional government, for Kerensky? Well, it's the Kornilov affair. Again, you've heard about it, you've read about it, but just to clear it up for you about how it happened. Kerensky appoints, in some ways to appease those on the right that want to keep order in the city and are worried about protecting their businesses. He appoints Kornilov. Now, Kornilov was already seen as a sort of a potential, as I say here, darling of the right wing for being able to do that, for being able to protect the industrialists, the landowners' interests, etc. And Kerensky appoints him also as a way of bringing sort of troops into Petrograd that are going to follow the provisional government's orders and that are not going to, either call for the provisional government to be end to end or act upon their own initiative. And to stop anything happening as had happened with the July days again. And this proves to be another catastrophic mistake, as we've seen with many mistakes by many different people that led to the Bolsheviks taking power. Kerensky appoints him, and then Kornilov obviously moving his forces into the capital. Kerensky gets worried because he suddenly then sees that hang on a minute, what if Kornilov comes in with these loyal soldiers who seem that they might have even more, they're more loyal to Kornilov than maybe the soldiers are in Petrograd. So he thinks that Kornilov might come in and bring about a coup to just take power and install a military dictatorship. So what does he do? He has to ask the workers, the people to defend the city. And who are the people that can defend the city the best? It is the Bolsheviks. So he has to release Trotsky and Alexander Kollontai and Sverdlov and Kamenev from prison. An all-party committee is established in the Soviet. Obviously, Kerensky, remember, is in both. He's a socialist and he is now the Prime Minister. And the Red Guards that had been created at the first All-Russian Congress of Soviets in June, they are brought up to defend the factories. The Kronstadt sailors arrive again a month later after the July days. Funnily, violence never actually arrives here because Kornilov's troops were intercepted and an agreement was made outside of Petrograd, north of Petrograd. But obviously this completely turns the Bolsheviks around from this force that had been said to be done, all in jail, Lenin abroad, and I mean, can you write it? It's unbelievable. And so what's the outcome of this? Well, Kerensky's own wife, as we can see here, she said that after this the provisional government lost all its authority, completely destroyed the prestige. Kerensky was condemned by the right wing for betraying Kornilov, for just getting panicked about Kornilov moving in, and at the same time the left wing condemned him because they thought that he was part of this counter-revolution, that he actually wanted to be on the side of Kornilov to put them down. So he lost face and reputation from both the left and the right. The Mensheviks and the SRs were discredited because they were even associated with Kerensky. So the Bolsheviks were able to use that later. We have even more desertions from the army, because anybody that was suspected, if soldiers suspected their officers of being involved and wanting to be on the side of Kornilov, they lost faith. They were maybe closer to the Bolshevik cause. So again, even more soldiers returning to their peasant the peasant villages, the Mir, and leading attacks on the manors now to take back more land. Bolsheviks were the clear winners, so this increases radicalization. We have more soldiers joining the party, which again, as we said, with the April Theses, are sort of, aren't as well read in Marxism, and these Bolshevik slogans are really, really hitting home to them. These simple slogans: down with the provisional government, down, ending the war, and peace, land and bread. So they now go on to win, as Lenin had wanted, majorities in the major Soviets, most importantly the Petrograd Soviet. And as Fiji says, the real significance here is that it reinforced the popular belief in a counter-revolutionary threat. So this idea of an outside threat that's trying to take down the Soviet, and that's what the Bolsheviks were able to take and then weaponize and harden. As Trotsky later wrote as well, this was actually the force that was roused here to rise against Kornilov was actually the army to be of the revolution. So 40,000 Red Guards had been armed, and yeah, that's just an example here. That's some of the Red Guards with standing outside of the Vulcan factory, posing outside of their factory in October 1917. Oh, all right, even more history there. But I hope that, well, this is the next jumping off point now. The Bolsheviks have got the Soviets as they wanted. They're more or less in the driving seat. Lenin is in Finland still, but provisional government's prestige has been completely destroyed. What happens now from September to December, we will soon see. Okay. Well, you already know because you've read, but as I said, give you a bit more direction. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.